everyone. Hope you've all had the first round of this conference. My name's Robert Ndugwa, Head of Data and Analytics section here at UN Habitat, joining you from Nairobi, Kenya. And you're very much welcome to this session, which will focus on the Global Urban Monitoring Framework and its local application. First and foremost, I want to pass our sincere gratitude to the conference organizers, and specifically the city of Shanghai, the SDG Cities Initiative, managed here by UN Habitat, and of course also the city of Madrid, and many partners and speakers with whom we've worked directly or indirectly to organize this specific session. As a preamble, I just wanted to bring up the background to the session. I think hearing the first session that has just closed, many of us know that implementing all these global commitments, including the SDGs, the New Urban Agenda, will obviously require a lot of technologies, a lot of new systems, but also a lot of new data, and as we've heard as well, a lot of partnerships. But many of these agendas obviously represent a challenge on the one hand, and at the same time also provide a very excellent opportunity for us to build new ideas, develop new approaches, but also build new alliances across the urban development landscape. And this, of course, includes new ways of working with private sector, the investment, as Daifed noted, but also civil society, academia, and the local governments. And knowing that we're almost like 5-6 years into the implementation of some of these big agendas like SDGs or the New Urban Agenda, it remains obviously a huge challenge, and it remains to be seen whether we'll make the most of this opportunity to plan better, build better in terms of supporting our cities in the remaining years and the decade of action when it comes to the SDGs. So I wanted to highlight those points as a preamble to this specific session. And of course, also note that if we are really going to work on a strong foundation that is truly sustainable and helps the functionality of cities, there will be many shifts that we need to work on. And of course, those shifts include, amongst many things, addressing the global sustainability and climate change challenges, enhancing aspects of resilience, but most of all, enhancing the digital and data-driven solutions that will ensure evidence-based decision-making and good governance as well as accountability. So for this specific session, we'll delve a little bit more into the aspects of the data side, particularly the monitoring systems, hearing more from the tools and some early experiences and case studies that cities have put in place in enhancing the local level monitoring, and obviously hear more as well about the Global Urban Monitoring Framework, a tool that has been developed by many partners and designed particularly to assist countries and cities to track progress that is being made at the local, national, but also at the global levels in ways that also allows integration of many facets of sustainable urbanization, as we've had. So without any further ado, I just want to highlight that today we have a very strong panel. It's a very strong panel drawn from a lot of influential speakers and experts. We have Kevin Johnson, who heads Geographia in Australia. We have Ed Stan, Executive Director from the Greater Sydney region. We have Shilani Stobole from the Ministry of Housing in Botswana. We have Zhan Cheng from Shanghai. We have Bernardo del Castro from UN Habitat Bolivia, and later we'll be joined by Abdul Hakim from the Qasim Urban Observatory in Saudi Arabia, and we have Erin Bromegem from the city of Los Angeles. So allow me, I think, first to introduce to you Dr. Kevin Johnson, and I will just give a brief bio about Dr. Kevin. But the full bio will also be available in the chat, so I recommend you also look out for that. But Dr. Kevin Johnson is the Managing Director of Geography, as I earlier noted. He has almost 30 years experience in economic and policy analysis, and he's a PhD holder in economic geography. He has been working with us in the last 1.5 years here at UN Habitat, particularly with assisting on the design of the Global Urban Monitoring Framework, which is designed to measure various aspects of sustainable development, including the SDGs, but also the New Urban Agenda, and particularly its application at the global, national, and subnational levels to track those various targets. Kevin will be sharing with us some bit of that experience, but also other experiences from his own other work. Kevin, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you for the introduction. I'm going to share some slides with you to give you a little bit of a background in the history and the development of the urban monitoring framework. I hope that you can see that slide. This is going to be a bit of a high-speed fly-through of the work carried out over about 12 or so months, mostly in 2020. It was work commissioned by UN Habitat to develop the urban monitoring framework. It was sponsored by the City of Madrid. It was done with the assistance of, I recall, 26 people from around the world, from different agencies around the world. This was the task team, each of whom gave up some of their time and their thoughts and ideas to advise on different aspects of the urban monitoring framework, aspects like what sort of data might be collected for it. At the start of it, there was a clear rationale for the UMF. I won't delve too deeply into that, but it was important that we kept this rationale in mind, and the rationale went something like this. We all know that cities are going to be accommodating more than half of the global population over the next few decades, and that's going to continue to grow for some time. And therefore, there was an urgent need for sustainable development of these cities. And this meant that we need a manageable, fair and comparable way to measure how or whether even cities are becoming sustainable. UN Habitat was asked to address this, and they felt it was necessary to bring in an independent person to run the project, someone who had no direct stake in the development of an urban monitoring framework, and that would be me. Well, no stake beyond being a citizen of the globe myself. So there was a lot of background work had already been done by the time I joined the group, sometime in, I recall, in early 2020 or mid 2020. But we had already started with some basic rules about what was within the remit of the task team to consider for an urban monitoring framework. Firstly, that it would align with the new urban agenda and, of course, the SDGs themselves. Secondly, that it should aim to be comprehensive, measuring all of the aspects of cities. And it should really be focused on measuring and quantifying the well-being of people, not on how nice the infrastructure was, but how well it served residents and visitors. As a monitoring tool, it would require data collection. And while it was very important, and it's always considered very important that we require high quality data for the UMF, at the same time, it needed to be affordable to collect. That meant where possible, data that was already being collected should be used in the UMF. The process of collecting this data and implementing the UMF needed to be repeatable over a reasonable time frame. I believe preferably the preference of that was for annual data collection and annual implementation. And again, therefore, it couldn't be costly data. And finally, the task team agreed that in some small way, at least, the UMF should encourage people to participate and innovate in its implementation. And this is what was created in the first instance for the UMF. It looks quite complex, but at its heart, it's actually quite a simple idea. There is a matrix at the heart of it made up of the primary objectives for our urban areas. And these were taken directly from SDG 11. And this was to make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. On top of that, these were cross-tabulated against the typical domains we use to think about urban areas: society, economy, environment, culture, and governance. And there was some debate around how we would bring these together. And we originally started with 3, and that grew to 5 when we recognised there were differences to consider here. And then we would cross-tabulate the domains with those objectives and create these attributes. Each of these attributes needed at least one, and preferably more than one, indicator that cities would select to measure the attribute. So, for example, an attribute like a safe and peaceful society would require a robust and a useful measure, at least one, to measure what it means to be a safe and peaceful society and how that might change. And finally, we also wanted to create something that allowed a city or country to select indicators from across the matrix and use these to measure specific issues like child well-being or pollution or something like that for unique projects, for unique cities and for specific policy priorities. And while we generally understood what the urban domains are, we know what a society is, we know what an economy is, we also needed to make sure that those 4 core objectives were not just vague concepts. And to do this, we took pre-existing work from the UN to articulate what these terms actually mean. And having clearly articulated statements about these terms helps in choosing the indicators themselves. As for the indicators, there were some simple processes in the first instance by which these would be selected. And this was the subject of some debate early on in the numerous conversations I had over several months with the various members of the team. The most obvious principle was that we have to have measures for each attribute, and that it's for a city to implement the UMF, it needed to measure each attribute. But we didn't want to overwhelm cities with a requirement to collect hundreds of data sets or require expert external assistance. It needed to be something that could be implemented locally. So we aimed to select fewer but better indicators. And that's where the task team really came to the fore because of their expertise in unique subject matter areas. Then we created a selection criteria for picking the indicators. And in fact, I actually had the first go at implementing that selection criteria to come up with a preliminary shortlist, which since then has been improved and revised several times over. The criteria we used would include things like, well, obviously the indicators have to be relevant to urban areas, they have to be measurable at an urban scale. They had to have directionality, and by that it meant we needed to understand whether an increasing number in an indicator was a good direction to take, or a reducing number was a good direction to take. We needed to understand what it meant to get a higher number or a lower number. It was also important that the indicators, as I mentioned, were linked in some way to the New Urban Agenda and the SDGs, that there was a direct relationship, and better yet, that they were actually indicators that were already being used and deployed in other mechanisms and other measurement tools. It was obviously much better to come from there. Each indicator, the data that it collects needed to be disaggregatable into important cohorts like age and gender. And I believe that most of the indicators that were selected in the preliminary shortlist can be broken down that way. And there was a general conclusion that outcome-based indicators are typically better than output-based indicators. For example, and this is a common example used in discussions, measuring infant mortality, which is an outcome measure, is a more direct way to measure a safe society than the count of maternal healthcare workers, which may indeed measure improved infant mortality, but it is an indirect measure of infant mortality. Many people on the task team pointed out that different cities have different resource levels, so we needed to be flexible in the type of data that could be used. The conclusion was to encourage everything from traditional data sources like surveys, in-person surveys, online surveys, those sorts of things, quite cheap and affordable to run sometimes, through to GIS analysis of map and satellite imagery, to the new types of data that are emerging now. And I noticed this was mentioned in Ed Glazer's talk, things like cell phone data. As long as the data met a minimum standard of quality and integrity, then the source of the data wasn't a concern. Finally, as I mentioned, we wanted a framework that could be adapted, that you could borrow and refine and possibly even improve for specific projects and objectives. To some extent, that's exactly what the Shanghai Adapted Index project is doing, is taking and building on this, on the UMF. So that's the short history of the UMF to now. I have to say that I'm looking forward to seeing where it's going to go over the next few months as cities around the world look to implement it. And I thank you for your time. I hope you found that insightful.
Thanks a lot, Kevin, for that quick and brief introduction to the work, the Global Urban Monitoring Framework. I know that we'll have later a session for Q&A where I think we'll be able to interact with a lot of the participants, but also address a few questions that are coming through the chat. And obviously, as you noted there, we are now moving into that phase of working with countries, working with cities to test and implement and actually apply the Global Urban Monitoring Framework. And I think today we are also honored and very lucky then to have quite a number of city representatives who might be able to speak to us in terms of their early experiences and interaction with the Urban Monitoring Framework, and how that they see that being applied in the various contexts. And I think it's very timely for me then to introduce Eddie Sten from the Sydney Greater Region Commission, who should be able to speak to us about those specific experiences. So first, just a short intro for Ed. I think Ed is currently the Assistant Executive Director or the Acting Executive Director at the Greater Sydney Commission in Australia. He has previously held a number of public and private sector roles, particularly dealing with infrastructure. He is a qualified lawyer with a wealth of experience, and he has recently completed an MSc in Sustainable Urban Development at the University of Oxford. I think Ed has, been one of those pioneers who has expressed a lot of interest in applying these global tools at the Global Urban Monitoring Framework. So we're happy to hear from you, Ed, and take it from there.
Thanks very much, Robert, for that kind introduction, and thanks for the opportunity to present briefly to you today. I'll just load up my slides as well. Here we go. Okay. Put that into presentation mode. All right, well, before I start, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I meet today. I'm the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, I should say, their land. I acknowledge the Aboriginal people of Australia, elders past, present and emerging, and I extend that respect to any Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander or First Nations people joining us on that call today. I'd also like to particularly thank UN Habitat and, of course, the municipality of Shanghai for supporting this conference and the discussion that we're having here today. Certainly, you've shown a lot of support already at UN Habitat for the work that we're doing at the Greater Sydney Commission. So very quickly, I'll introduce you to the Sydney region, the Greater Sydney Commission that I work for, and then where monitoring sort of fits in. And I'll say up front, we're relatively early in our monitoring story. We're a new organisation. We've only been around for 4 or 5 years, and we're really excited to see how the urban monitoring framework can provide a bit of a structure for us to think about how we evolve and develop our monitoring work. So in terms of Greater Sydney, for those of you who are not familiar with the area, it's an area of approximately 12,000 square kilometres. So it's pretty large, 5.3 million people, most populated city in Australia, housing about 1/5 of our population. It also is responsible for around 1/4 of the nation's GDP. So it's a really significant part of Australia and the broader Asia-Pac region sort of economic, social and environmental success. We have a really polycentric city, but we're particularly focused now on the idea of there being 3 key nodes across our city. It's a city that's more equitable as well as more efficient and sustainable. In terms of my organisation, we were established in 2015 to provide an overarching governance structure for Greater Sydney. In Australia, there's 3 levels of government, and the Commission is funded by the middle level, the state government, in our case, the New South Wales state government. But of course, we work across all 3 levels of government. That's essential to our DNA. And in particular, we work really closely with 33 municipalities that ultimately make up Greater Sydney. Those 33 municipalities actually nominate 5 of the 9 members of our Commissioner Board. The work we do, very briefly, covers off 3 areas: thought leadership, so telling the story of Greater Sydney, thinking about the opportunities of Greater Sydney, making sure there's a strong voice for Greater Sydney within government decision-making and within the community. Secondly, strategic planning. This is the team I work in. We're actually responsible by law to prepare strategic plans for Greater Sydney, which I'll speak of in a second. And thirdly, we actually have a couple of innovation districts, global innovation districts, where we're using them as sandboxes to test out ideas, but also to bring to bear some governance where there's real complexities between different stakeholders. We act there to curate that governance and ensure that the great outcomes that we know globally can arise from innovation districts do in fact emerge. So relationships, collaboration, and coordination, that's sort of central to what we do. In terms of the strategic planning, this is where our monitoring really sort of comes into its own, is we have 2 really sort of core products. We have a region plan that covers the entire city region, and then we have 5 district plans that bring that down to a more local level. Those 5 district plans are then drawn upon by the 33 municipalities I mentioned. The plans set out both a 40-year vision and 20-year plan for Greater Sydney, and then local government, municipalities, and indeed our state agencies are all required by law to give effect to them. So it's a connection between strategic planning and on-the-ground outcomes. We're updating those currently because they have to be updated every 5 years, and we just held a census. We're on the same cadence and 5-yearly cycle as the census. But the plan review is also going to look really carefully at the question of monitoring and evaluation. That's something that we identified when we were first established was a critical part of strategic planning, and we're really looking to dive a bit more deeply into that. Of course, this is also an opportunity for us to fold in the experiences of the last few years, COVID, and climate change as global issues, but also some of those local issues, such as the incredible bushfire emergency that we had at the start of last year. How do we learn from those, and how do we build that into the DNA of our planning work in our city? So currently, the monitoring approach we take is based on 4 overarching performance indicators, under which a number of sort of sub-indicators set. This image here shows you those 4 performance indicators: jobs, education, housing, 30-minute C, walkable places, and addressing urban heat, mapped against the 10 directions that are sort of the focus areas of our current plan. Those 4 indicators, as I said, do have a number of different metrics that we've been drawing upon, and each year we've been releasing information on how those metrics are tracking in what's called the Pulse of Greater Sydney. I'll put a reference in the chat after this if you want to have a look at that. The indicators were developed through a significant amount of community engagement, and including through a citizens' jury. So it really sort of was the message that we were hearing. But we're now, as we review the plan, we are thinking about those performance indicators. And as I said, this is where the work of the Global Urban Monitoring Framework comes in. In particular, what the appropriate number of indicators is. Certainly jurisdictions we've looked at overseas do seem to use a larger number of indicators. Also indicators that are reliant on credible data that is repeatable. One of the challenges we've observed talking to other jurisdictions is that issue of census cycles. If you're relying on that data, you don't have that regularity of data. We're really interested in the opportunity to benchmark in a friendly, sort of accessible way with our sort of peers around the world, and also to understand longitudinally how, of course, our city is changing over time. That is why we want to monitor. We want to know how well our city is tracking, how well our plan is influencing change. What is the impact, as Kevin was saying? We also want to create a program of monitoring that frankly allows people to engage more with what is sometimes a slightly esoteric area of strategic planning. We want to make it relevant to people's actual experience of the city. So in terms of the Global Urban Monitoring Framework, we're really quite fascinated by the work that's emerged. And as I said, I'm really grateful for the support we've had from Robert and his team in terms of exploring what it means and how it might operate. It also is really interesting for us in terms of embedding the Sustainable Development Goals and the new urban agenda. That's something that In the years since our plans were released, we've realized this is really something that provides such a powerful framework and structuring for our city growth. So we're really keen to pull that bit in, learn from those voluntary local reviews that have been done around the world as well. Also in Australia, there was a National Cities Performance Framework, but it's just been discontinued. So we are looking for new ways that we can make sure we can understand how we're tracking compared to other cities, where there's comparable experiences and where there's cities where they've learned things that we can then carry across into our own city as well, and of course share our experiences as well. So right now we're reflecting on how we might approach monitoring over the next 5-year cycle, and particularly how we might take that global urban monitoring framework. So for us, we're thinking it's going to be a step of looking through those indicators, distilling them down, working out what is particularly relevant to the challenges of our city, but also looking for what's going to provide us some sort of comparability with other jurisdictions. Certainly, it's a really attractive framework, and it's one that I think is going to be a useful way for us to provide some simplicity to what frankly can be quite a complex area. I find that a lot of the people we talk to, a lot of our stakeholders, they have a view on monitoring, but as you dig deeper, you realize there's a lot of assumptions that you need to step through. So having a common framework, I think, will help us commonly have that discussion with our stakeholders around the world. Lastly, if you don't mind, I've got a quick plug. I know we're all really fascinated in COVID and what it's meant for cities. We've just completed a piece of research that we're hoping is useful for our peers around the world. It's a piece of work we did with the Brookings Institute, with the Business of Cities, I should say, over in the UK with Greg Clark and Tim Moonen, talking to 20 cities. So there's a wealth of material there. I'll put a link in the website as well. Just plenty of interviews on trends, interesting things, including the role of strategic planning and monitoring. So I'd encourage you to go and take a look at that. And I'll leave it at that in the interest of time, but thank you very much for the opportunity to brief you where we are at the start of the journey. But hopefully this is an ongoing conversation we can have with you all, and we'd love to learn more about your experiences and monitoring and evaluation as part of a strategic planning story. Back to you, Robert. Thanks very much.
Thanks a lot, Ed, for sharing those experiences, but also sharing, I think, a lot of wonderful and ongoing initiatives in the greater region of Sydney. I think what is crucial here is to note that, yes, you are very much at the beginning of a journey, but equally, I think, as we heard from Kevin, we've just designed the Global Urban Monitoring Framework, and I think it integrates a lot of the recent ideas and new approaches, of course, also including the bit of inputs from what COVID has, brought into play. So I think looking very much forward to working with you, but also hearing from you later in the session of the Q&A so that we can interrogate some of what's going on in the greater region of Sydney. So next up, I will introduce my third speaker, and she's Amshilani Stoboli. Amshilani is a housing officer at the Ministry of Infrastructure and Housing Development in Botswana. Her background, she's a town planner by profession with a specific interest in dealing with low-income housing. She currently oversees research, policy development, and monitoring and evaluation on housing and urban development in Botswana. She also leads Botswana's engagement with UN Habitat and many other agencies, and also coordinates the monitoring and reporting on the new urban agenda for Botswana, both at the national, but also interacting a lot at the international levels. So Amshilani, the floor is yours to hear more of the experiences from Botswana, particularly what you've been doing around the city level monitoring, including perhaps future plans for voluntary local reviews. Floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much, Robert. So I'm going to talk more about the SDG 11 monitoring and reporting project, our experiences in that project, the lessons that we learned, and how we've managed to use that data to come up with concrete projects. So just a brief background on the project. This is a project that we implemented with technical support from the UN Habitat as well as the Economic Commission for Africa. So, and also we're also partnering with the city of Francistown, Gaborone as well, and our statistical agency. So the main aim really was for us to, to develop capacity, to generate data, city level data, so that we can use it, even in our policies as well as in our planning. So we're using the City Prosperity Index. So at the end of the day, really we managed to profile Gaborone and Francistown and to generate information at city level. Okay, I'm trying to go to my next slide. I don't know. Okay. I think I'm having, okay, no, I was having some challenges there. Okay, so first I want to share on our implementation structure, because I really feel this is something that was really important for us, that also led to the success of this project. So what we did was we made sure that all the structures that we developed for this particular project, the SDG 11 project, we made sure that, we integrated into the already existing structures. That way we made sure that, every work that we were doing, every milestone would report it to the National Steering Committee on SDGs. This is a body, rather a committee that is an oversight role on SDGs in Botswana. So that way we would really make sure that they are well informed and would also push the urban development agenda at that highest, level of that committee. And we also made sure that we had linkages even with the national development planning process at all those levels, so that at the end of the day, it would also assist in terms of prioritization of projects, as well as even in the budgeting, so that at the end of the day, our reports will not gather dust, but we'll be able to use them, to inform even our programs and policies as well. So now I'll move on to the our key experiences, the main lessons, that we really learned from this this project. The first one is the fact that, administrative data is a very important source of information. So there's really need, for us to, collect it, validate, as well as, to disseminate it. So we really needed mechanisms to do that, because even during the process when we're collecting data, some of the information, the administrative data, we're not able to use it because maybe it will just come maybe as a piece of paper, So we needed to make sure that the data is validated, because it had to get into the official statistics. So it's really important for data to be, the way it is stored, the way it is validated and disseminated is also very important. And then the City Prosperity Index reports that we produced, they've really played a key role in terms of guiding investment, in terms of, even the planning. I'll share more about that in my next slide. And then the other thing that we also learned is that the process, it also is important as the end product. And I really need to stress this, the fact that, we need active engagement. We need to build networks at all levels, so that at the end of the day, we can, have that transdisciplinary approach in our planning as well. So now I'll move on to the achievements, or how we've leveraged the data that we collected for us to inform policy. So at national level, we've really, I'll start off with the housing policy that is currently under review. We've really recognized that the interconnectedness of the urban indicators. In the previous policy, the one that we're currently using, rather, we were more output-based. But now in this review that we are working on now, we are really bringing in the interconnectedness of indicators, and also bringing other dimensions, the environment, maybe mobility issues into it. And we're involving everyone in the entire housing delivery value chain. And also the reports really laid a groundwork for the production of the new urban agenda progress report. So for those who have been involved in international reporting, I'm sure you will know that it's quite, a daunting task, producing those reports. But due to the fact that we already had some networks in place, we already had a team in place, it was easy for us now to just mobilize and be able to produce that report. We've also managed to come up with new housing program targeting the urban poor. And this one is specifically targeting the urban poor because looking at the complexities, that surround even housing for the urban poor, we needed to really have a specific project that is targeting them. And then we're also having some discussions with UN Habitat to set up an observatory so that at the end of the day, we can be able to monitor the data that we're collecting on the indicators and then be able to link data to policy making. At city level, here I want to mainly share the experience of Francistown because in terms of, I feel they are the ones that have really done quite a lot in terms of utilizing the data that we're collecting. So I'll mainly make reference to the city of Francistown. So one of the achievements really is they managed to lobby for a clean and green Botswana project. And this project is being done under the auspices of local economic development. And this is really important because now they are now turning their waste into wealth. And so this is something that is really, we're really excited about. And then at the time when we were working on this, the reporting, when we were profiling these two cities, in Francistown, we only had a single monitoring station that monitors air quality. So it was really difficult for us to see even how we are doing, even in terms of environmental sustainability. So now we now have 3 monitoring stations. So that, as a result of that, we set up even 2 more monitoring stations, across different areas in Francistown to improve our monitoring of, particulate matter as well as the greenhouse gases. We are now, even the implementation of the special economic zones is now a priority in Francistown. At the time when we were working on this, we're still, having an idea on how we're going to do the special economic zones. But now with the direction from the reports, we're now able now to really make sure that we develop Francistown as a transport and logistical hub. Francistown is now in the top 4 in terms of implementation. And most of the work you really credited to the reports. And then they've also done there's some partnership with the Botswana Investment and Trade Center to develop a city profile. So this is a profile that they will be using even in terms of, attracting investors. So that is something that we are really quite excited about. And then, of course, because one of the things that we noticed even when we're doing the profiling is we're not doing so well in terms of municipal finance. So now they've come up with means to try and generate even more revenue, to review even the revenue rates so that they can improve municipal finance, informal sector strategies as well. Those are some of the things that they've been working on, because really in terms of our employment levels, we are quite, we're not doing so well. We have a high rate of unemployment. So now when we are really encouraging and promoting the informal sector, we're doing something really to make sure that we support the people who are excluded. So in summary, really, even as I conclude, this project, it has really been helpful for us. It really developed our capacity. We had technical officers who were trained in both cities, in Gaborone as well as in Francistown, even at national level. And these are officers that are coming from different sectors.
روبرت هنا ممكن تعالى اكلمه كده يا ريس. روبرت موجود هنا اللي هو رئيس اللجنه الجلسه. طب كلمه تعالى كده هنا على الشات.
Sorry about that. There was some interference there. So, we've really done quite a lot. I believe we've done quite a lot in terms of making use of that information into direct policy, but we still need to do more, in terms of, to come up with mechanisms to collect, the data, to review it regularly, because that's also the other thing, to store it as well as to disseminate, so that now it can be used even for policy development. Over to you, Robert. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Shirani. I think you've shared very well the experience there for Botswana, but I think more so the aspect of completing that complete chain of data collection and how to move that data into policies and investments. And I'm sure the audience will be looking forward to hearing more of how you've done it, because I don't think it's as simple as put in words, but it requires more than just a connection, a walk into one's office to get that data translated into action and investment. So thanks a lot, Shirani. So next up, I will introduce our next speaker, Dr. Jian Cheng, who is the director at the Shanghai Coordination Center of World Cities Day. Dr. Cheng holds a PhD from Lomonosov Moscow State University in Russia with a major in sociology. He has also published a lot of peer-reviewed papers, and this includes both at the international level, but also at the national level, particularly in the area of international relations and urban sustainable development. He's been very keen in terms of supporting the establishment of the World Cities Day, which he initiated as part of the government of China and the United Nations. And at present, he mainly works under the guidance of the Shanghai Municipal People's Government and the Ministry of Housing and Urban Rural Development of the People's Republic of China, and cooperates very closely with many teams at UN Habitat. Dr. Jian Cheng, you're very welcome to share the experiences and what we can learn through this aspect of monitoring, but also the adaptation of Shanghai Index. Floor is yours.
好的，各位来宾，大家好。我是上海世界城市日事务协调中心的陈建。很高兴与大家交流推动全球城市监测框架本地化的上海实践。为了推动落实联合国2030年可持续发展议程和新城市议程，中国住房和城乡建设部、上海市政府以世界城市日为平台，与联合国人居署合作，于2020年启动了全球城市监测框架上海应用指数的研究，我们简称它为上海指数。我们希望通过这项工具，帮助城市评估和反映自身在可持续城市化方面取得的成就和面临的挑战，从而确定或调整发展重点。上海指数的研发参考了联合国人居署、联合国开发署、世界银行等国际机构的相关指标的设计和实际的应用情况。第三，考虑到发达国家、发展中国家和新兴国家城市的特点和差异性，上海指数设有综合指数和主题指数。综合指数衡量城市在可持续发展领域的总体进步水平，而主题指数侧重对特定领域的评估。综合指数的指标体系框架沿用了 GUMF 的理念，从联合国提出的经济、社会、环境、文化和治理这5大城市可持续发展的支柱出发，结合可持续发展目标第11项安全、包容、韧性和可持续的4个重要的子指标、子目标，构建了5×4的指标维度，涵盖了城市交通、医疗、教育、基础设施、就业、能源等领域的40余个指标。接下来我们还将继续调整和完善。主题指数的指标体系将由中方和联合国人居署结合全球可持续发展的热点话题和年度主题，比如说今年的气候变化，共同研究发布。目前上海指数的指标数据，不好意思，主要是来源于公开的数据，以及通过调查问卷等方式获得的更多的公众参与的意愿和行为的数据。根据研发计划，这个指标体系可以进行更新迭代，所以将来随着联合国可持续发展目标城市旗舰项目在全球的推广，更多的城市可以在这个项目的支持下进行系统性的加强数据能力。上海指数的指标数据来源也可以相应的扩大，更多的使用大数据和地理信息数据。所以我们认为上海指数的应用和 SDG 旗舰项目将是相辅相成的。考虑到目前世界各地城市的数据基础资料参差不齐，上海指数将分阶段在不同的城市开展试点验算。我们也非常欢迎各个城市根据自己的数据基础加入我们的应用试点， 或者保持对我们研究进展的关注。上海指数的应用将有助于科学的评估和监测和持续的监测城市的可持续发展的绩效，有助于城市编写落实联合国2030年可持续发展议程的地方自愿评估报告。我们今年上海也要发布这个报告。上海指数的应用还将推动城市提高管理和治理能力，加强数据能力建设。此外，上海指数未来也会作为上海手册案例遴选的依据。我也在这里介绍一下，上海手册是由人居署、国际展览局和上海市政府共同编制。它是一个关于全球城市可持续发展的一些优秀案例的合集。那么在10月31号，就是后天的世界城市日，我们会发布2021版的上海手册。那么今后一段时期呢，上海指数的细化完善和应用推广将成为世界城市日的一个重点工作。我们希望通过共同的努力，把它打造成一项不仅有助于城市提高管理和治理能力，还能够促进城市数据能力建设的政策工具，做出上海在全球城市可持续发展领域的应有的贡献。我的发言完毕，谢谢。
Thank you so much, Dr. Sheng, for providing that excellent background and connection, because what is really important there is that from the Global Urban Monitoring Framework, it's been very keen for us to see how various adaptations from that structure can actually build up in depth to help us understand. And I think you make a very strong connection that the Shanghai Adapted Index will actually be one that will be rolled out in various cities, but at the same time be very closely connected to the SDG cities initiative, as well as inform the choices of the Shanghai manual, but also the World Cities Day, because that will help in terms of connecting, but also knowing those cities that perform well and those that do not perform well. So I'm looking forward to the Q&A, where I think more questions will come through in terms of your early experiences and adaptation for the Shanghai Adapted Index. So next up, I will have Bernardo Del Castro. Bernardo is an economist who graduated from the Bolivian Catholic University. He has vast experience, particularly in supporting municipalities and as well as in human and childhood rights. He has managed various programs, both national and global, and various projects that are focused on governance, democracy, decentralization, but also social development. He's currently a technical expert for formulation of city policies in Bolivia, and is also responsible for connecting the various pieces of work of UN Habitat to the Bolivian states, particularly in the sector and the territorial articulation of the urban policy in Bolivia, to ensure that this informs the design, but also the development of the local monitoring and evaluation system. Bernardo, you're very welcome, and we look forward to hear, I think, the early experiences, perhaps touching on the CPI, but also other initiatives, including the Urban Monitoring Framework in Bolivia. The floor is yours.
Muchísimas gracias. Voy a hacer la presentación de mi parte en español. Y preparé la presentación también en español, y entonces me disculpo por la presentación en español. Permítame compartir la pantalla. Lamentablemente no puedo compartir la pantalla, mil disculpas. ¿Se la ve? Robert, perfecto, ok. De acuerdo. Entonces, muy brevemente me gustaría dar un poco de contexto en relación al proceso que estamos siguiendo en el caso de Bolivia para el desarrollo del marco de monitoreo y evaluación de la política de ciudades que ha sido formulada para el país con apoyo de ONU Habitat. Acabamos de concluir el proceso de formulación de la política. El gobierno boliviano está en vías de análisis y aprobación de la política urbana, y en ese contexto hemos podido desarrollar un importante ejercicio de diagnóstico previo sustentados en una herramienta precursora del marco global de monitoreo urbano, que es el índice de ciudades prósperas, el CPI. En ese sentido, el momento de construcción del sistema de monitoreo de la política es vigente y hemos acordado colaborar en el pilotaje del marco de monitoreo global con la finalidad de incorporarlo en el seguimiento, monitoreo y evaluación de la política urbana de Bolivia. Con ese contexto, me gustaría señalar inicialmente que este marco de monitoreo persigue, en un contexto de poca información, como es el caso de un país como el boliviano, como el de Bolivia, persigue dos grupos de objetivos. Un grupo de objetivos que tiene que ver con el monitoreo de carácter estratégico en relación al cumplimiento de los objetivos, las líneas estratégicas que propone la política en el largo plazo, y por otro lado, con la intención de contar con un monitoreo operativo que refleje más bien el cumplimiento procesual y el desempeño de las ciudades en el desarrollo de la implementación de la política. Nos entusiasma mucho que el UMF nos propone un grupo de indicadores que, desagregados desde la perspectiva de los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible, permite trabajar en ambas dimensiones, y que en función a la agregación de estos indicadores con otros componentes contextualizados, generará un marco, digamos, completo, holístico, que permita revisar y acompañar la política tanto en el nivel nacional como en el nivel territorial. En la medición diagnóstica del CPI tuvimos la oportunidad de trabajar en la dimensión de cada ciudad y también en la dimensión nacional, obteniendo claros resultados sobre las prioridades que deben ser atendidas para cada una de las ciudades que componen el sistema de ciudades del país. Y en función a ello nos permite eso establecer una agenda de desarrollo orientada a la mejora del desempeño del desarrollo urbano de las ciudades y a la priorización de las acciones de política pública y de inversión pública conectadas. Nosotros creemos, y de manera muy entusiasta, que la posibilidad de atar esta fuente de información desarrollada desde la óptica del índice de ciudades prósperas con el marco de monitoreo global es un avance sustantivo, porque además de identificar las prioridades nacionales y locales para el desarrollo de la política pública, nos va a permitir generar un vínculo estrecho y directo con las dimensiones propuestas para el cumplimiento de cada uno de los ODS desde la perspectiva urbana. En ese sentido, abrazamos con entusiasmo algunos aprendizajes que creemos que son importantes de incorporar al sistema de monitoreo desde la lógica de la construcción del marco global de monitoreo. Me gustaría señalar algunos de ellos, ¿no? El primer aprendizaje es la posibilidad de vincular información espacial con información de carácter socioeconómica. La posibilidad de que para cada una de las ciudades del país, a pesar del déficit de información, hemos conseguido identificar la lógica de crecimiento, identificar la dotación de espacio público, áreas verdes, y calcular indicadores espaciales que luego pueden ser trasladados a la al debate socioeconómico y contrastar esto con los principales problemas del desarrollo, la inequidad espacial, la falta de dotación de equipamiento y la desigualdad socioespacial, nos permite generar un panorama muy amplio de posibilidades de trabajo, pero también la posibilidad de focalizar de manera específica las inversiones que el Estado debe realizar en la ciudad para poder superar estos escollos del desarrollo. Igualmente, el índice nos proporcionará la posibilidad de vincular componentes que están inscritos en su concepción con la finalidad de generar otros productos, digamos, subsidiarios. Estos otros productos tienen que ver con un ejercicio de innovación en la gestión pública que es muy bienvenido en el país, en el entendido de que permite especificar y puntualizar algunos elementos que antes no estaban visibles para los gestores públicos. Y por otro lado, permite también transparentar la información, el acceso a la información por parte de toda la sociedad civil y los actores involucrados en el proceso de desarrollo en los distintos niveles del Estado. Este ejercicio de innovación nos permite medir elementos que antes no estaban siquiera visualizados por el Estado, como el acceso o la accesibilidad a los bienes y los servicios públicos, la densidad económica o la desigualdad socioespacial, que son elementos que ahora han sido incorporados en el lenguaje y en la perspectiva de desarrollo del país. En ese sentido, creemos que el puente entre la medición del índice de ciudades prósperas y la medición del marco global de monitoreo urbano nos va a permitir construir una base para el monitoreo y evaluación de la política pública en Bolivia sumamente consistente, pero al mismo tiempo audaz. Muchísimas gracias.
Thanks a lot, Bernardo, for sharing those experiences, particularly the aspect of how you've been able to apply the City Prosperity Index, but also other additional analysis, including at the lower levels, to offer additional understanding of what is happening in cities across many different indices. I think what is important here is also, I think, later in the Q&A, to share with us how you've been able to roll out these sort of programs to monitor in various cities. I think 26 is quite a big number for many countries, but of course, just to share that experience of how this has been able to be done, and particularly on the aspect of sustainability. Thanks again. And up next, I will introduce my next speaker, who is Abdul Hakim from Qasim Urban Observatory. Abdul Hakim has worked in Qasim municipality in Saudi Arabia for over 28 years. He's been responsible for establishing the Qasim Urban Observatory, which was very instrumental in recently undertaking a voluntary local review that was very largely driven by data and evidence that was collected by the Urban Observatory. So Abdul Hakim, the floor is yours to share your experiences.
Good afternoon for all. Thank you, Mr. Robert, my colleagues, panelists. First of all, I just wanted to express my happiness to receive this kind invitation to participate in this important workshop. The cities all over the world are adopting urban monitoring policies using indicators of the Sustainable Development Goals and their progress to its targets. The major challenge which facing the city administration is providing the data to measure those indicators, as well as there should be a universal framework for urban observatory, which is considered one of the most important challenges that face us to provide a common ground to identify our cities and measure their development and their relationship with each other in a sound scientific manner. Speaking of which, in our city, Buraida in Saudi Arabia, we understand very well the importance of data and the value of having a framework for the urban observatory process. Urban observatories in the kingdom started their works for over 15 years. Our urban observatory in Al Qasim region started since 12 years ago. I had the honor to be one of the urban observatory founders, beginning by Buraida city, the capital of the region, until we completed the urban observatories network for 13 cities before 3 years. So we really appreciate the role of urban data and urban monitoring in achieving sustainable development. Considering the SDGs, the new urban agenda and the local vision of Saudi Arabia 2030, the role of the urban observatory has becoming more important than before. During the past 5 years, we in Qasim Urban Observatory present series of important, unique report. One of the most important report, the urban development status in Qasim region, which done in cooperation with the data analytics section of the United Nations. You can find this report on the UN Habitat website. Another one is the first voluntary report to measure sustainable development goals, focusing on goal number 11 for the first time of its kind at the Middle East cities. We launched many other qualitative reports and studies, such as the livable report, city prosperity, and supplementary local indicators. Last one was transformation of the urban environment of Buraida under the COVID-19 pandemic, which provide beyond any doubt that the presence, accurate and up-to-date data is a major factor in measuring urban phenomena. Finally, we would underscore the importance of accurate and up-to-date data for it's very important for decision makers to serve the urban need better and overcome the challenge that face cities and embedding their progress toward a sustainable development goal, especially with the COVID-19 pandemic continuing for the second year and its direct impact on the economic and resource of our cities. Thank you for all. Thank you, Mr. Robert.
Thank you so much, Abdul Hakim, for those insights. I think it's very important there to note that with a very active urban observatory, I think it puts you in a better position to have ready data to produce many reports, but also inform decision-making, for example, during crises like the COVID-19 that is currently ongoing. And I think that's a very wonderful experience there. But perhaps also for the adoption of the urban monitoring framework, again, becomes much more easier when you have the setup and structure of a very functional urban observatory like what you have in Qasim. Thanks a lot for that experience, and looking forward to hearing more from the audience in what they might want to learn more from your experiences. At this juncture, I also want to highlight that we'll be doing a Q&A just after the last speaker. And I suggest that for those of you with many questions, please post this in the Q&A tab, where those questions will be picked up and addressed to the various speakers. So last but not least, I'm happy to introduce Erin Bramangem from the city of Los Angeles. Erin serves as the Director of Olympic and Paralympic Development in the Mayor's Office of International Affairs under Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti. In this role, she's focused on realizing the city's plans to make Los Angeles very sustainable, inclusive, resilient, but also innovative as they lead up to the Olympic and Paralympic Games that come up in 2028. She is also a Conrad N. Hilton Foundation Fellow, where she's using the framework of the United Nations Agenda 2030 to align and measure and track the LA city's progress towards the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Erin also serves as a senior fellow on state and city diplomacy with the Truman Center on National Policy, and obviously a very long wealth of experience, which is available in the chat. Erin, the floor is yours to hear more about the city of Los Angeles and how you've been able to unpack a lot of the SDG indicators, but also the lead up to the global urban monitoring framework.
Thank you, Robert. It's wonderful to be with you today. Let me go ahead and share my screen, and I'll just go here and make sure that everybody can see these slides. Hopefully you're able to see this now. So first, let me start by thanking UN Habitat, and thanking the Shanghai Municipal People's Government for the invitation to be with you today. It's a little early here in Los Angeles, but I'm still excited to have heard all of these wonderful presentations. So thank you for everyone who was able to join the earlier session, as well as to all the panelists this morning. It's been a fascinating conversation. So let me go ahead and start by explaining a little bit about what we do here in Los Angeles. I want to try to see if I can, there we go. So in LA, we recognize and have been a part of the Sustainable Development Goal Agenda since 2017. And we do it in large part because we see ourselves as a big part of the global community, and we want to be a part of a shared agenda for progress, really the world's shared development agenda. But more importantly, it brings us into this common language with other cities, local and global, that can help us really map together where we're working towards the goals, how we can understand gaps that exist when we look at how we map our goals and our plans and our policies and our initiatives to the framework of the SDGs and back. And then it helps us measure our progress towards the goals to make our policies more data-driven and transparent. So in 2019, we launched our first open SDG data reporting platform. This is a platform that was originally built in partnership between the US and the UK government, as well as the Center for Open Data Enterprise, to create an open source platform that could be utilized in a variety of contexts. And we forked that code back in 2019 and established our own platform, localizing it, adding in specific targets, as well as revised targets that we measure here in LA. And we're now measuring 159 SDG indicators. Those have some customization in them to adapt indicators that didn't previously recognize the role of local government, or didn't previously kind of work for local government. And so we've made those conversions, and we've also captured all of that in a wiki guide that's available. So anyone, anywhere, any organization or other city or municipality is able to adapt this platform for their own use as well. And we've started to see others do this. We're working with several cities throughout the United Kingdom, as well as with Durban in South Africa, and then San Diego here in Southern California. We use a variety of data sources to support our reporting through the Open SDG platform, namely Earth observations and community-generated data. You might know this as citizen science in other contexts, but we prefer the term community-generated data since it's almost always an aggregation of information from folks posting to sources like iNaturalist and other biodiversity hubs online. We also use official national statistics from the US government, and then a lot of municipal data. And I'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. So though we use all of these 4 different types of sources, we think that there's more that we can do. And so we're interested in continuing to push some of our boundaries on how and where we're grabbing data to support reporting out. And I'll explain that we think that that's really important to crowd in as much data as we can where applicable, so that we add more context and more insight into the work we're trying to accomplish. And I think that that starts with what we're going to be working on here in the next year or so, which is really a taxonomy to integrate hyperlocal data. Thinking, if you would, about the indicators as a top line assessment, how can we also look at sub-indicators beneath that, or proxy indicators that help illuminate more around the total picture of the data that we're trying to secure and understand? How do we also build in trend and gap analysis type information to our reporting and to our platform? All of that has to be local because, as many of you are obviously familiar with, the SDG indicators are often worded as reduced by half, or consider a reduction of half, or less than, kind of based on whatever baseline from which you're starting. And so in order to capture an accurate trend or gap analysis, you need to have that local baseline to begin. And so I think it's really important that we start being able to visualize that and understand the work that we have left ahead of us from now through 2030. And then we want to continue to analyze better disaggregation, both by demographic characteristics and geographic characteristics in the city. And we want to use that to try to pinpoint some root causes. So if we can better understand who or where someone is disproportionately impacted, and as a result is experiencing a given SDG indicator differently in the city of Los Angeles, we want to be able to understand more about why. And that gives us this need, again, to crowd in additional sources of data to better understand context. And then what's highlighted here as number 4, further integrate our quantitative data capture with lived experience narratives. And what I mean by this is, how do we take a qualitative assessment and actually marry that to a quantitative assessment such that we can see a journey map, see a lived experience path that helps us pinpoint where in aggregate we may identify points of intervention on a life map or on a journey that policy or improved services could change the trajectory and help us do a better job of achieving the goals. And that's really the point. We want to go from not just such a focus on getting more and more data, but actually on using the data, analyzing the data, and helping us pinpoint places in the data where we can do a better job as public servants, as delivering the services and the policies and the programs that residents in Los Angeles depend on, and trying to build up models that can be reusable by others globally. And so in the near term, what we've done is looked at how we can identify through our data work where we have certain gaps and shortfalls, and then pull together teams of students and university partners to actually start to take action and make recommendations on how to improve that space. So you can see a subset of some of those reports that we've done recently. All of them map back to our work on the goals, but we're very, very, very interested in trying to translate some of what we see from our data into actual concrete action and next steps for policy. The cities really are our testing grounds for innovation in this in this current time in which we live. And we think the SDGs help make that innovation more actionable and rooted in the humanity that is at the heart of all of our cities and urban areas. So thank you so much. I'll stop there.
Erin, thanks a lot for sharing those experiences. I do believe you bring in a very important dimension, and that's the aspect of ensuring that the quantitative aspect of understanding what is happening in our cities is not lost, but becomes very complementary to the quantitative data that we collect. And I think more importantly, also ensuring that we engage those other communities, the community generated data becoming very important and central in terms of understanding the bigger picture of what is happening in the cities. So thanks a lot for sharing the experiences from the city of Los Angeles. At this juncture, I would like to open up the floor to the audience, and happy to hear more, your early thoughts and feedback to the presenters. And we have a Q&A chat box that is open for all of you to field your questions. But in the meantime, I will come back to my speakers just with a few general questions, and you're happy to jump in as and when you feel you're comfortable. I see a hand up.
Yes, we have a hand up.
Okay, I do like the audience, so I'm happy to have the first question from, I don't know whose hand is up.
Laranchi Anas. I'm sorry if I pronounced it wrong. Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Oui, bonjour, c'est moi.
Yes, we can hear you.
Laranchi, go ahead. The floor is yours.
Allô, bonjour. Je ne sais pas si vous m'écoutez.
Aranchi, please go ahead, or alternatively, you can type your question in the chat box and I will pass it on to the moderator.
All right, thanks a lot, Kusa. I think Lolachi can type in because I also couldn't hear. But in the meantime, I think for my speakers, I think first question here is just to hear from your early experiences. I think you might have already interacted with the urban monitoring framework, and more so maybe for some even with the Shanghai Adapted Index. And I think listening today from the variety of presentations that we've had, I think a key question for the audience, speaking for the audience at the moment, would be that what will it take really to unpack and ensure that as a global community we do adapt one uniform urban monitoring framework. Of course, knowing and listening to many of you, you can see that you're already working with some sort of frameworks. But what should it take, or what will it take for us to ensure at least we harmonize as much as we can? So perhaps I'll call out Ed, maybe to go first.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. I think from our perspective, looking at it sort of entering into the process and observing cities that have already, like LA, sort of already adapted, or Shanghai, I think for us it's that balance between the consistency of approach and the consistent framework that Kevin explained, but also demonstrating to our decision makers in our communities that it can be adapted to the particular location, that it's not a cookie cutter, but rather that it is an adaptable approach, but with some common threads through it. I think being really clear on that, and certainly that's the this sort of commentary I've had is people say, oh, well, surely something that works in LA, that's not quite right for Sydney, or sort of something that works in Shanghai, that's not quite right for Sydney. And so I think it's really important for us to communicate actually that fundamentally the design of the framework is such that it overcomes that concern. And I might sort of actually yield my time to Kevin, because Kevin, that's one of the concerns. We talked to Kevin, who's sort of, he's done a great job of explaining how the framework has that balance at its very core. So I might sort of over to Kevin to better articulate it than I can, I suppose.
Thanks a lot, Ed. Kevin, sure, your thoughts.
Well, thank you, Ed. I think that for me the challenge was always choosing the indicators, choosing correct ones. But I don't think it's an impossible task. I think that when we selected the original ones, and certainly the ones that Robert and his team have worked on since then, if you look through them, you can see that there are some universal metrics that are relevant in any city in the world, because they're fundamental to, I guess, fundamental to the principles of the UMF, which is about the well-being of people. So I'm talking about things like the opportunity to participate in cultural activities that occur in the city, or again, I mentioned before, infant mortality, or the quality of the air quality in the city, the proportion of households that have access to clean and safe drinking water, and things like that. These are universal measures, really, and certainly some cities can just tick all of the boxes and say they've got them all. Or most of them sorted, most of them, to a very high standard. But I don't think it's impossible. If you look at the measures, there may be some very culturally relevant ones or geographically relevant ones that might not make sense. I live in Melbourne in Australia. There are some measures there that maybe aren't that significant, but they're not totally irrelevant to my city compared to another city on another continent. So I don't think it's impossible at all. I think that there's a little more work to be done to sort of polish those, to refine and select it. But I think that's what the cities are doing now. I think the sooner that cities start deploying it and testing it, the better for everybody. Not least because when we started this, you'll recall, Robert, when we started this project, or when I joined you in this project, it was agreed that it would be an iterative process, and it would take some time before it was a perfect mechanism, but that we needed to just start and roll it out, and then over a number of years it might improve. I think that was agreed back at the beginning of the project.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Kevin, for that wonderful feedback. I do have a few additional inputs and questions from the audience. And somebody is interested in knowing, for example, maybe for those who have already implemented part of the CPI or the other SDG-related frameworks, how does this relate to planetary health? Who would want to take that on?
So I can speak just to that a little bit. In Los Angeles, in addition to tracking the Sustainable Development Goals and the indicators associated with the SDGs, more than 250 through UN stats, but we are tracking less than that, about 100 less than that. We also, though, have other plans and policies that have more finite or discrete goals within the city. So I'll point to LA's Green New Deal, which is our sustainability plan as a city. They're tracking independent of the SDGs, though mapped to them, more kind of discrete, lower level kind of targets that reflect back up to kind of bigger aspirations in Los Angeles to achieve 100% renewable energy by 2035 at this point. And so being able to understand, again, this hyper local context of, if in order to get to 100% renewable energy, we need to understand all of our sources. And then we also need to understand kind of, again, our goals around carbon emission reduction. And when we look at something like that, we're all the way down to counting kind of conversion of regular to LED light bulbs in our city streetlights, right? So you're literally looking at kind of this very, very minute level data that can then also map up into these and kind of more aggregate or aspirational type goals. And so that's something that you can do in a place-based context that you can't do when you're looking at these big goals in aggregate. And I think that that's where it's really helpful to understand and connect place-based, very like highly hyper-local data to then kind of see how it maps into multiple goals and understand where you might have the ability to learn more about maybe where something's working or where it's not, or how something's working or how it's not, based on looking at these really discrete data sets. So that's something that we're doing and hope to continue to do more.
Thanks a lot, Erin, and perhaps calling in Shirani just to hear from the experience of Botswana. How has it been, I think, dealing with a variety of dimensions? And I know, for example, social inclusion that you dealt with involved a lot of health components. Did that really pick it out? And there's also been another additional question, which I think focuses more on the difficulties of dealing with the many indicators. And I think this was addressed to Erin, but I'm Shirani as well. You could touch on that before I get back to the other speakers. Shirani?
Okay, yes, thank you so much, Robert. In terms of issues to do with social inclusion, I think for us, really, what came out was issues to do with sanitation. I think that was one of the things that we saw, that this is something that we are really struggling with. So for us now, we are looking at, particularly in the old neighborhoods, almost slum-like conditions. So this is now something that we are really looking at to say, how can we best, make sure that we improve sanitation, because all the infrastructure is already there. But now what we are really struggling is people are not really connecting to that infrastructure that is already there. So this is something that we really need to work on, because it has impact on the health, on the environment, and all that. And then also on the question that you posed earlier on standardization in terms of using a harmonized framework, I also wanted to say, I think I also agree with the previous speakers, with Kevin, with Ed, also looking at the fact that, I think there's also need for that, that flexibility, because for us, we noticed that when we're using the basic index, it was much easier for us, really. Most of the indicators were available, but when you're using the extended index, some of them were not available. So if there can be that flexibility to make sure that people can even use proxies or try to adapt to their situation, I think that's something that can help. I'm not so sure really if we can totally have a harmonized framework that we can apply to all. I'm quite doubtful about that, but I think for the basic ones, I think that's something that we can really move towards. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Shirani. Perhaps turning the mic to Dr. Sheng. I think the Shanghai experience has been one that is very unique, because you're part of the pioneers that are leading on the adapted index. And I think the key there then is moving from the urban monitoring framework, quickly adapting it to the Shanghai Adapted Index. And it will be excellent, I think, to hear more about what challenges have you picked up early enough that other cities could also learn from in the aspect of implementation. Dr. Cheng.
Dr. Chen, I think he has dropped because he has another urgent meeting now.
All right, thanks a lot, Kusai. Perhaps it's good to turn that question to Abdul Hakim if he's still online. I think they've had already an experience actually to implement entire VRR. That question would be very valid to know how practical, I think, your experience has been in implementing that. Abdul Hakim. I hope we still have Abdul Hakim.
Hi, Mr. Robert.
Robert, how are you? I appreciate your kind invitation. Could you please repeat the question, because we lost the connection?
question to you both is just to share the experience of applying the voluntary local review, which basically utilized the global framework. But how was that? Was it challenging? Was it easy? Because that could give a few insights in terms of applying the urban monitoring framework in the next phase.
Yes, okay. Actually, we have a good work at this because we have it was easy for us to do this with experts on UNDP and UN Habitat, and because we have a good data. We are working in the Urban Observatory for 10 years, so we have a huge data and huge connections with the most of the departments, government departments, the universities, experts. When we started this unique project, we have to work on the methodology. That's the first. How to do this, how to work, and how to make it progress, and how to find the good data and the analyzing our data to get this the voluntary robot. And we have to collect the absence data in this side. Then the process and the methodology for doing this was in cooperation with the MOMRA, the Ministry of the Planning in Saudi Arabia, gives us the ability to do it in a good way. We think that the most good practice, the most important target we have to do, we already done in this report, is to be realistic, to consider the whole aspect of our local community, to be good known about our problems and our issues, and how the data serve us to clarify these issues, to clarify these problems. It's not about comparing with other cities. It's something about, as I say, it's not the comparing between cities. It's the target process comparing between cities. How to do the quality of life and the ability and the sustainability goals to be better in each city on its local conditions, in its local areas, you know. And we have to work on in this partial issues to solve it, and we put many small committees with the universities, with the men and the person who is responsible for each issues. This gives us the whole, this mainly in brief, the whole process that gives us this voluntary report and how we achieve this report. If I get the point, I don't know.
Thank you, Arif. Yes, that's very, very clear indeed. I think the key, I hear you very strongly, that when you have a very stronger foundation, like a strong urban observatory, it becomes easier to shift and adapt. And I think in your case, you already have a mechanism of many partners, of many local actors that are actively supporting the evidence-based approach to investments, to decision-making, etc. So that's really excellent. Perhaps in 30 seconds, Bernardo, perhaps the thoughts for you from Bolivia. Bernardo?
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, maybe I think that there's a path that is clear for us in terms of measuring, reporting, and decision making, and therefore it's really important to promote these voluntary reports as the mechanism of doing that path, of going through that path. And I would like to invite the experts of all countries, of all cities, to follow that path in order to achieve a better comprehension of urban development in terms of global or universal understanding of what that is.
Thanks a lot, Bernardo. I think it's been a very, very wonderful session. I'm sure many of you have learned a lot. Myself, I've learned and had a lot of new experiences that I need to carry away with me. But I think the bottom line here is that unless we design systems in our cities that will help, collect the data and information that helps us to understand in very detailed ways what is happening in our cities, we are very more likely not going to achieve a lot of these global targets at SDG or the New Urban Agenda or the many others. So I do feel that a successful city is one that is going to be driven by innovation, by data, and technologies that allow it to understand better what is happening to the last mile. So from me, and on behalf of all the speakers and the organizers, I want to say thank you to all of you. And we know this is just the beginning of a conversation and the journey. We'll continue being part of the ongoing sessions and in this conference, but even post this conference, we look forward to engaging and working with all of you to a successful implementation of the Global Urban Monitoring Framework. So I hand over back to the Secretariat, QSI and your team. Thanks a lot.